Hello, friends. Welcome to Fiscal Focus on DawnNews English. This is Danish Khan, and today I'm joined by Dr. Aasim Sajjad Akhtar. He's professor at Aasim University, and he writes about political, economic, and development issues pertaining to Pakistan. Thank you, Aasim, for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Now, moving on to our next topic, as you are aware that it's a budget season in Pakistan and it's seen as one of the key exercises in terms of the government spending and projections about the future, and also more about the sentiment and confidence among consumers, investors, and average folks about the economy. There's a lot of talk about inflation being under control, being less than 5%, and growth has been steady. You are in Islamabad right now. How do you see average folks are being impacted by the economic stability or macro stability?
Yeah, well, I don't know who would use stability in their right mind. I mean, it's the stabilization of hardship and poverty, really, is what we've seen. Yes, of course, inflation, which was in double digits, in fact, touching 30% for the best part of 2 years, has come down. But even in the classical, economics literature, inflation is always measured alongside one other variable, unemployment. And it's interesting to me that in the economic survey, which, as you know, precedes the publishing of which precedes the budget, there's no unemployment figures. It's quite stunning that you actually have a document that the government is putting out where it's not because they don't have figures. I mean, yes, there's another debate about the extent to which, the formal economy and all figures, whether it be inflation or unemployment or all of the other, forex or growth figures, whether they actually accurately capture the reality of Pakistan's economy, which, like many in post-colonial world, is highly informalized. But even if you sort of put that aside for a second, the fact that there's no formal unemployment figures, because in my estimation, unemployment is well in the double digits, probably above 20%. And if you add underemployment to the story, where people are just eking out precarious forms of living on a daily basis, then you're probably talking 30, 40%. Now, that is a shocker that we're not even acknowledging that. So, whether in Islamabad or in the rural peripheries, I think the situation is dire. And the other thing I will note, which we might come to, is that the one thing that the government has acknowledged is that agriculture is in a state of utter distress. And again, incredibly, they'll acknowledge that. They'll say major crop yields have declined, input prices have increased, and at the same time, based on IMF conditionalities, they've withdrawn over a number of years now, but this year it's been, since cemented. They've withdrawn the fundamental subsidy that small and landless farmers have always benefited from, which is a food support price,
Mm.
which means irrespective of the amount of, money you spend in tilling your crop, the government buys it on a minimum price so that at least you can make ends meet. Now, that's been completely repealed entirely as well. So they're admitting some things, they're completely ignoring other things. And that, I think, that to me confirms that economic hardship is the name of the game. And, whether the figures that they're quoting or maybe even multilaterals are quoting reflect that or not, I think the reality, when you look around you, and you can see that people are really, really struggling.
And you mentioned unemployment, and the conventional wisdom based on Phillips curve is that there's an inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation. And if inflation is declining, it's probably at the cost of unemployment, and that's the trade-off. Of course, it's not always true, but given the central bank, the State Bank of Pakistan has been raising interest rates, which leads to decline in investments, which may lead to layoffs and more unemployment. That's the standard story because numbers are not given, so we assume that's the case. Now, there's also a lot of talk about uh, the debt servicing, and that seems to be the largest part of the budget. Now, given this constraint, what are the options the federal government have? Or what can they do in order to avoid this trap?
Yeah, no, there's no avoidance, and there's been no avoidance for, a couple of decades now. In fact, the debt repayment burden is reached really unprecedented proportions. On average, over the next 3 fiscal years, we are scheduled to pay back $25 billion a year. And again, if you go into the fine print, that's not even sort of principals. These are mostly interest payments that have accrued over the decades. We are now in a situation where we have a lot of debt that we owe to bilateral donors and multilateral donors. But in fact, we've started taking more debt from commercial banks
Mm.
to pay back the bilateral and multilaterals. And most of our bilateral donors, the best we can hope for, you hear in the news every second or third day, is some kind of rollover, which basically means that they've just extended the amount of time that we have to pay them back. So there is no getting away from this. And it's on the basis of this crippling debt burden that everything else is being shaped. You know, the fact that they're rolling back subsidies, the fact that they're trying to say we're extending the tax net, but again, they're just taxing those who have no option but to pay tax. They're not taxing the rich. They're not taxing themselves. Let's put it that way. So I don't think that in the short run there is a solution. That's why, you know, for me, it's always about trying to bring into the debate the long run sort of causes of why we are so indebted. Why are we in an economy that is perpetually in deficit, is perpetually struggling? In fact, the gap between what we import and export has increased. The gap between, you know, what we bring in revenues and what our expenditures has also increased. And I think this is about, you know, basically a highly class and regionally, in a sense, uneven economy, which has and then also the additional factor, sort of enmity with our neighbors, which has also contributed to a high level of unproductive expenditure. And so, you know, you put those all together, and I don't think you can fix the debt problem on its own. I think you need to go to the source, in a sense, and think about the long-term structural features, whether it be, you know, the way assets, land included, are distributed, the fact that those who have all of these assets don't pay tax, the fact that you have new sectors like real estate, which is immensely profitable, which is all speculative, which generates no jobs, which dispossesses, you know, farmers and some slum dwellers alike, but they pay virtually no tax. The fact that, you know, even our industries, whatever limited industrial base we have, are all low value industries like textiles, rice, ghee, and we are never going to be able to cover the cost of imports. You know, in fact, our biggest export, as you know, is labor. So essentially, the biggest thing we make money from is sending, you know, working class people abroad, rather than actually something concrete like a real thing. So these are deep structural sort of ills, and debt is a reflection of that. And then because the creditors acquire so much power on the basis of the fact that we have to pay them back, then we just go into this cycle of austerity, right? So basically this, like all the other budgets of the last some years, is an austerity budget. And they're giving us a lot of flashy figures to make it appear like things are going well. But really, they're putting all the burden onto the most vulnerable, onto working class majority of the population. And it's really, in a sense, literally business as usual.